Shit. Okay. Going back. Papa Nolan, thanks for pointing that out. I'm going to be retracting this entire segment and starting from scratch. So, congratulations to Carolina. Carolina coming off of their, or not Carolina. The Boston moves on in the Eastern Conference. They take the Prince of Wales Trophy. They move on to the Stanley Cup Final. Carolina, as much salt as I threw at them in my last video, I'm going to come out and say they had a phenomenal season. And it was really hard. For as much vitriol as it sounded in my last video, it really was hard to not like them. Carolina is so much like the Islanders this year, where they kind of came from that underdog type of status. They built their fan base gradually as the year went on. They rallied around where most of the league was kind of just beating them down. Congratulations to them. And not to toot myself too much, but it did end the same way I said it would. They ran into a more talented team. That's not to say the Islanders would have fared any better, but realistically speaking, that's what happened. They ran into a more offensively talented team. Not only that, but I think the Bruins were... The funny thing about the Bruins, and I know a lot of people hate Boston sports, and Boston sports have been in the finals. I think there's been a Boston team in the finals of like 9... the last 10 finals. You count the Patriots, you count the Red Sox. The Bruins is their third cup final in the last 9 years. I kind of separate the Bruins out of that. It's unpopular, it's whatever, but they've been at that point to make deep runs for the last several years, and this year is the year that it finally culminated for the first time since 2013. So we'll see what happens with them. I'm going to go on record saying I want Joe Thornton to raise a cup before I think he retires at the end of this year. I'm pulling for San Jose, but realistically speaking, if you want me to predict right now, the odds don't look good for either team coming out of the West against Boston. They're just way too stacked up front. They're a very physical team. They're very offensively balanced, and they've been very tame in this year's playoffs. I know, retracting back, you remember Brad Marchand's antics from last year, licking players. And I'm not going to say anything about some of the questionable calls from the Maple Leaf series and beyond, but Boston's been in a position to make this run that they've made this year for a while, and they're finally at the final. So we'll see what happens with them. But anyway, moving on to Islanders talk. There are 4 big key free agents for the Islanders that they have to re-sign, and in order of priority, this is a little unpopular, but I'm going to be honest, and I think Brock Nelson is probably their top priority of Nelson, Leonard, Lee, and Eberle. Reason being, and I think it's very close with Nelson and Leonard, but the reason being Nelson is a little more prioritized because they are stupid thin at center. Take away Brock Nelson from the currently signed forward group, and Casey Cizikas is the second center. And that's not to take anything away from what Cizikas has done all year, because he's had a breakout year. He's been one of their best forwards this year. But the idea of Cizikas centering the second line is a little frightening, considering it would be Barzal, Zeker, and then you really don't have much going down. And if I have to see Leo Komarov play another game as fourth-line center, I'd probably rather watch Bridgeport's top 2 lines. So Nelson, I think, will get prioritized, as he has been. From what little has been coming out from Lamoriello, they have been aggressively pursuing him. I think he will get it. Probably around a 5 or 6 year deal. He'd be looking at probably 6 or 7 mil. For a guy like Brock, who's produced 20 goals consistently 3 of his last 4 seasons, who had a career year this year with 53 points, he deserves it. And Nelson was hands down their most consistent forward this year. Which is so funny because you think back the last 4 years since he came into the 13-14 season, Nelson was always the guy who would have stretches of he would just disappear. He would be a ghost wearing skates. He always had that big physical frame, but he never really played to his potential. And this year, I think he finally found his potential and finally had an idea of what he could do if he really played to his entire potential. Trotz got that out of him. Trotz has gone on record saying he likes coaching Nelson. I think it's a good relationship for both sides. They'll likely keep Nelson for about 5 years, $7 million per is my guess. Now, number 2, Robin Lehner. And like I said, it was really close between Lehner and Nelson, but the only reason I don't see them getting a deal done with Lehner, not that I don't think they'll get one done, I think they will be able to negotiate with him. But if negotiations fall through with Lehner, it will probably be because of term. Lamoriello has gone on record saying that he envisions Ilya Sorokin as the starter of the future, and Sorokin even made comments earlier this year and even last year when Garth Snow was still general manager that he had no thought or consideration of coming to the Islanders when Garth Snow was in power. Now that Lou Lamoriello is at the head of this team, Sorokin envisions the Islanders as a more favorable destination and will probably even come over now. So Lamoriello's focus is getting Sorokin out of the KHL. His deal expires at the end of next year. So if Lehner's going to stick around, it will probably be for a 3 or 4 year term. That's my most educated assumption from what has been revealed by Lou and what has been tossed around so far by the insiders. So if a deal with Lehner doesn't get done, A, it won't be from a lack of trying, and B, it'll be because of term. My best guess is that Lehner sticks around 4 years. I'm going to say about $5 million for Robin Lehner. Now, number 3 with Anders Lee, the first-year captain of the Islanders. He was minted captain on the eve before they played their first game against Carolina. And in a leadership role, I think Lee did a phenomenal job. Probably the best Islanders captain of the last 9 years. I mean, in and out, you saw it in post-game press conference. I like it when captains show a little bit of emotion. I like a vocal leader. I like someone who, we don't, fans, pundits, whatever, don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but Lee gave a better idea of, I guess, the pulse of what's going on in that locker room better than any captain in the last 9 years. Not only that, I think he's a respected leader. I think he has a good presence on ice. Obviously, he plays a physical game, but one of the most consistent goal scorers of the last 5 years, even though this year he obviously was going to take steps back from his season last year. 51 points, 28 goals. I mean, a guy that scores 25 goals in 4 of his last 5 seasons, you got to keep him. There's not really much question about that, especially the quality of leadership he provides. The only caveat with Lee is going to be, in his leaner years, is it going to be a contract worth keeping? Because you got to think of it like this. Lee is 29 right now. He's 28 right now. He's going to turn 29 at the start of next season. Those years after the first 3 are going to bite. And we knew that last season when we had to re-sign that guy. We knew that going in, especially with these 7 or 8 year deals, which he's probably going to be looking at, it's going to get a little hard to carry. Now, he's 28 years old. This production is probably not going to get any better than it is in these next couple of years. These things have to be considered, especially when structuring these deals. That being said, obviously, Lee's going to stick around. I think it'd be really silly to slap the C on him and then have him walk in free agency, especially in light of what happened last season. So I think when Lou and Barry made the decision to give him the C, they damn well knew that he was going to be sticking around for, the foreseeable future. And it's hard to see. I mean, he bought the vintage fisherman hat. He is so invested on this team on and off the ice. It's hard to envision Lee leaving, but, that's just the kind of things that you have to consider when structuring a deal like that. So Lee stays, I think, and it's going to be a 7 or 8 year deal. He's going to get at least $7 million per. I wouldn't be surprised if he got 8. That's just realistic of it. So if anything falls through with any of those 3 guys, Nelson, Lehner, and Lee, then you start the conversation of, can we re-sign Jordan Eberle? As of right now, those 3 guys I mentioned are probably going to be sticking around. And as a result, Jordan Eberle is more than likely going to walk in free agency. That's just the unfortunate reality of it. It's a numbers game, and the Islanders don't have much cap to move around. But if they make the decision to move on from certain guys that may or may not have played themselves out of the lineup, especially given the new structure imposed by Barry Trotz and the way that they play now, there might be room to sign Eberle, but not before a trade is made or not before one of the free agents says, hey, listen, I'm out. I'm walking. That's the only scenario where they keep Eberle. If Valtteri Filppula, moving on now, if Valtteri Filppula is back next season, that's not good. Because that signifies that the Islanders didn't make an improvement in shoring up their bottom six. As great of a year as Filppula had, he had 31 points. He had another 17 goals. He almost got to 20. I said he would probably get to 20, and he missed about a 10 or 12 game chunk due to injury. That probably factored into it. But, as good of a year as he had, it just shows that they weren't able to get an upgrade up front. They need an upgrade at center. They need a top 3 winger. Those are 2 offensive musts. And if Filppula is back, that signifies that they weren't able to get that done. I wouldn't like it. Now, Tom Kuhnhackl, there's no reason to not keep Tom Kuhnhackl. And I don't know why he had as much... I don't know why Islanders fans had as much frustration with Tom Kuhnhackl. Well, outside of the idea that Tom Kuhnhackl was taking a spot for the young guys, he played 36 games this year. He only had 9 points, but every time he was subbed in or every time he was called upon to play, he did a damn good job. He reinforced the penalty kill, which got better as the year went on, and the penalty kill ended up being one of the best in the playoffs. It went over 90% success rate, and Kuhnhackl was a big part of that. And not only that, Kuhnhackl was making $700,000 this year. He was under $1 million for a guy that was able to sub in and be a crutch in the bottom 6 and a penalty kill, a top guy on the PK. It would be silly not to bring him back next year for like a $1 million. Give him a raise. Give him $1 million for a guy that's basically a spare part and performed adamantly. The guy's 27 years old, still very much in his prime as a forward. It'd be silly to let him walk. I think that Kuhnhackl was a fantastic spare part. He's going to get another deal. Now, the guys that may have played themselves out of the lineup and may be on the move this following year, there's 2 guys that I would be surprised to see back on the Islanders next year. Nick Leddy and Thomas Hickey. I'd be pretty surprised if I saw either of those 2 guys manning a spot on the blue line next year for the Islanders. Nick Leddy, as great of a couple of years that he's had since he came over. Nick Leddy came over in the 14-15 offseason with Johnny Boychuk. He was one of the big 2 pieces that really helped enforce that D. He doesn't work in Trotz's lineup. He got better as the year moved on, but he really had bouts of inconsistency. He struggled to still be the offensive catalyst that the Islanders relied on him to be. Smooth skating forward, as great as he is with puck handling, I mean, he's better suited for an offensive-minded philosophy. Trotz imparted this mindset of defense first, and Nick Leddy, was relied upon on years to quarterback the power play, to be the guy to enter the zone, of neutral zone break-ins. He hasn't been that this year. And the reason why is obviously it doesn't work. The system doesn't work with him. He even, from last year, from Doug Waite's Islanders to this year, Nick Leddy saw regression in both Corsi and Fenwick 4. His possession went down, which it went down all around, but especially with Leddy, he lost 2 or 3 percentage points in both areas offensively. And he ended up being more... just of a struggle than anything on this squad. He could still fetch a good return. He's still envisioned as a top 4 guy, and he's probably going to be at the forefront of trade talks this offseason when Lamoriello eventually goes phoning other GMs. So I would be surprised to see Leddy back next year. And Thomas Hickey. Poor Hickey lost his job when he got concussed in a game when they went to Colorado in mid-November. And since then, he came back and kind of struggled to readjust himself into the system. But again, Hickey was the kind of guy who was kind of... He became a spare part on this team, whereas in the beginning of the year, he had a lock for position. This mostly comes from the improvement and really the emergence for the first time of both Scott Mayfield and Adam Pelech, who Mayfield has been kind of a mini Johnny Boychuk. He's really been molded by that physical, aggressive style of play, which is going to serve the Islanders really well going forward. They need a physical, big body on D to kind of replace Boychuk as he begins to grow a little bit older and takes a step back and becomes more of a part of the bottom four. And then Pelech paired with Pulock, or a guy like Leddy, who maybe is a more aggressive puck-moving defenseman. Pelech is kind of more the stay-at-home, the conservative type of guy. And he had a couple of gaffes. He had his moments here and there where maybe he didn't show as much consistency. But those two guys becoming a big part, Pelech and Mayfield becoming a big part of the Islanders' D, puts Hickey and Leddy more of on the outside looking in. So those two guys are probably going to be bounced around in deals, as well as Josh Ho-Sang. Now, for some reason, it never worked out with Ho-Sang this year, and I don't think that it's going to work out with him at all. Ho-Sang is a restricted free agent this coming offseason, or this offseason. They might re-sign him, maybe, but with the way that his tenure has been here so far, especially with him being more of a passer, setup type of mentality, the Islanders already have a guy like that in Josh Bailey committed for the next 5 or 6 years. There's really no place for Ho-Sang on this team, even though I clamored for him to come up from Bridgeport in the beginning of the year. There's no spot for him, and he still has some value as a trade asset, but I can see him being packaged in with a Nick Leddy type or a Hickey type in the offseason to fetch back some top 6 help. So I'd be surprised to see Ho-Sang back. I'd be surprised to see a lot of those guys back. But moving on now to their offseason priorities. So number one is that the Islanders need the go-to sniper. And now everybody obviously is going to be saying Artemi Panarin. I am going to be as well. Obviously, they should be very in on Panarin, even if they don't land him. It'd be a big mistake to not be in on Artemi Panarin. It basically comes down with Panarin to either New York or Florida, which is what has been rumored up to now. I don't see the Rangers being a big player in that, even though, objectively speaking, I think the Rangers took a couple of steps forward in their overall development this year. It would be silly for them to commit him to a 7 or 8 year cap deal, only because I don't think the Rangers are going to be in the playoffs for the next maybe year or two. 2 years tops, next year at least. But Panarin wants to be on a contender, and to be honest, with the Panthers hiring Joe Quenneville, I think the Panthers are probably the favorites as of right now to land Panarin, and most likely Bobrovsky coming out of that conversation. But the Islanders need to add a top 6, forget top 6, they need to add a top 3 go-to scoring winger up front. And if it's not going to be Panarin, then I think they need to lock a Jeff Skinner. Jeff Skinner, not just for his career year this year in Buffalo, 40 goals, 63 points. He had a phenomenal season in Buffalo, but they need a guy who's not afraid to shoot. I see Dal Cole progressing in that direction. Dal Cole, when he was in the lineup, was really more of the one driving the goal scoring and the shot production on his lines. Even when he was with Filppula and Komarov, as weird as that amalgamation sounds, they need a guy who's going to develop into the go-to scorer, the go-to guy to pass the puck to. But more than that, speaking on the goal scoring end, the Islanders as a team don't shoot the puck much. And especially when it comes to a guy like Barzal or Bailey, or these guys who like to carry the offense a little bit more at center on the wing, they need to start taking more shots. Barzal needs to start taking more shots. Bailey needs to start taking more shots. As a team, you start to throw off the dynamic a little bit when you start to be a little more aggressive. And part of that, I think, was the constant adjustment to this defensive style of play that Barry Trotz is imparting. They got more comfortable on it throughout the year, but there really needs to be an impetus just on the entire team to shoot more in general. So, all of that being said, we're going to see how they're going to approach this offseason. But if it's not Panarin, if it's not Skinner, if it's not these big-name guys, it's more than likely than not going to come from the trade market, and that's, again, where you go back to the Nick Leddy, the Hickeys, the Ho-Sangs. you're going to have to see how these guys play into offseason conversations and offseason trade talks to upgrade the team. So we're going to have to see how they go from there. It remains to be seen, but, that's just my spiel on it. That's just my take. So we'll see at the end what this looks like. This team is going to look drastically different next season than it has been this year. So as the offseason goes on and once the cup is awarded, that's really where a lot of this is going to start picking up. That's where they're probably going to finally start to announce some contract extensions. I expect them to announce a Nelson and Lee extension by the time the cup is awarded. As for the Leonard and Eberle, we'll see. We'll see how the numbers play out. But Papa Nolan, I appreciate you being here consistently throughout this broadcast. Thanks for pointing out to me that my mic was muted. That was ridiculous. I'm so sorry about that. But you're the real MVP. I'm going to wrap this up now, kind of get a little bit more going. But check out my articles on ESNY. We've got a lot of talented writers on there. I'm going to be having a feature out this coming week on the Islanders pending UFAs, who they need to re-sign, etc. Thank you again for tuning in, guys. I will see you again on the next one.